The man who tears an engine apart already knows it runs. That is the part nobody talks about. He did not pull the motor because it failed him. He pulled it because something in him needed to go further than working, past the surface, past the acceptable, down into the irreducible truth of the thing. Most people would call that unnecessary. They are not wrong. They are also missing the point entirely. There is a man in his early 50s in a rented bay at a self-service garage. The engine block is on a stand beside him. His hands are covered in something that will not fully wash off for 3 days. The car, a 1994 pickup with 240,000 miles, runs. It ran this morning. It will run better in 6 weeks. When he bolts this engine back in with new bearings, new seals, fresh rings, and a honed cylinder wall, he could have bought a newer truck. He could have paid a shop to do this. He did neither. He does not fully understand why, and that quiet incomprehension is the most important part of the whole story. This is not about engines. It never was. To rebuild an engine is to engage in one of the most psychologically loaded acts available to a person in the modern world. It is not mechanical work in the narrow sense. It is a confrontation with entropy, with impermanence, with the question of whether a person's knowledge and patience and physical care are still capable of reversing the direction of time. The engine is not the point. The question the engine is being used to answer is the point, and that question has nothing to do with horsepower. The roots of this behavior almost always trace somewhere specific, not to a manual or a YouTube channel, but to a person. A grandfather with grease under his fingernails who never used the word philosophy in his life, but demonstrated it every weekend in a concrete floored garage. A father who never threw anything away that could be understood. A mentor, a neighbor, an uncle, someone who showed, without explanation, that the interior of a machine was not a mystery to be feared, but a language to be learned. This is generational transmission in its purest form, not the passing of information, but the passing of a relationship to the physical world. The child who watched that person work absorbed something that cannot be downloaded. They absorbed a posture toward difficulty, toward patience, toward the belief that understanding is always available to those willing to go slowly. Psychologists who study skill acquisition use the term embodied cognition to describe what happens when knowledge stops living in the mind and begins to live in the hands. The concept, developed extensively by researchers like Hubert Dreyfus and later expanded in cognitive science, holds that certain kinds of knowing are inseparable from the physical body that does the knowing. A person who has rebuilt an engine does not remember how to do it the way they remember a phone number. They know it the way they know how to walk, through muscle, through feedback, through 1,000 micro-corrections that happen below the threshold of conscious thought. This kind of knowledge is intimate in a way that nothing purchased can replicate. It belongs to the person in a way that a receipt does not. And here is where the personality reveals itself. The people who rebuild engines instead of buying new ones tend to share a trait that psychologists call internal locus of control, the deeply held belief that outcomes in one's life are primarily determined by one's own actions rather than by external forces or luck. This is not arrogance. It is a quiet and earned confidence in the causal relationship between effort and result. These are people who, when something goes wrong, look first at what they might have done differently. They do not wait to be rescued. They do not assume expertise belongs only to credentialed specialists. They trust their own perception of reality. And that trust, which can look like stubbornness from the outside, is actually one of the more psychologically healthy stances a person can take in a world that spends considerable energy telling ordinary people that they are not capable. There is something else operating in that rented bay, something that the language of personality traits does not fully capture. What the man with the engine block is also doing, and this is the part that surprises people when they hear it said plainly, is grieving. Not dramatically, not consciously, but the act of disassembly and reassembly is, at its psychological core, a rehearsal of loss and recovery. To take something apart completely, to understand how it failed, to address each failure individually, and then to restore it to function, this is not merely mechanical. It is a working through. Psychoanalytic theorists in the tradition of Donald Winnicott describe transitional objects as the things through which people process inner emotional states. The toy a child clutches during anxiety, the blanket that stands in for comfort. An engine, for certain people at certain moments in their lives, functions as something adjacent to this. The machine receives the attention that the person cannot yet give to whatever it is they are actually working through. The engine can be fixed. That knowledge matters. It matters enormously. This extends, and it always extends, to the way these people handle relationships. The person who rebuilds an engine instead of replacing it is rarely the person who ends a marriage at the first sign of difficulty. They are rarely the ones who quit friendships when friction appears. They have a tolerance for complexity, for the temporary ugliness of something in pieces, for the patience required before a thing runs right again. This is not X. It is a philosophical commitment to the possibility of restoration. They believe, at a level below articulate thought, that most things broken can be made whole, not necessarily perfect, but functional, honest, and perhaps more trustworthy for having been understood from the inside. The people in their lives tend to feel, over time, that they are in the presence of someone who will not leave. There is a cultural force that works directly against this psychology, and it is worth naming. The entire logic of the modern consumer economy depends on replacement, not repair. Products are designed with planned obsolescence, a practice that became explicit manufacturing policy in the 1920s and has only grown more sophisticated since. The system produces things that are difficult to understand, expensive to repair, and cheap enough to replace that the decision to open one up and work on it looks eccentric. It looks, to many people, like irrationality. What it actually is resistance. The man in that garage with the engine block is not simply fixing a truck. He is refusing a particular story about what a person is: a consumer, a passive recipient of goods and services, someone whose role in the economy is to buy and discard. He is asserting, through action rather than argument, that he is a maker, a repairer, a person with the knowledge and will to extend the life of things rather than discard them. This is not nostalgia. This is a counter-cultural act wearing coveralls, and it restores something. This is the part that people who do not do it cannot fully understand. Psychologists studying what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow, the state of complete absorption in a challenging task that sits at the edge of one's ability, found that people in flow states report a restoration of what might be called felt competence. The ordinary erosions of modern life, the ambiguities of professional work, the impossible complexity of institutions, the chronic low-grade sense that nothing one does produces a clear and comprehensible result. None of these exist inside the engine. In there, causality is honest. If something does not work, there is a reason. If you find the reason and address it, the thing works. This is rare. This is, for many people, a form of repair that has nothing to do with the machine and everything to do with the person at the stand. The man in the rented bay finishes for the day sometime around 8 in the evening. He has not solved everything. The cylinders are honed. The block is clean. He will be back next Saturday. He knows what he is doing and roughly how long it will take. And this knowledge, the felt sense of a path through a complex thing, sits in him differently than most of what his week contains. He wipes his hands. He covers the engine with a cloth he keeps specifically for this purpose. He turns off the bay light. Whatever it is that drives people toward difficulty when they could choose ease, toward understanding when they could choose ignorance, toward restoration when replacement is cheaper and faster and recommended by every rational calculation, that impulse is not a flaw. It is not a quirk. It may in fact be one of the more honest responses available to a human being who has looked carefully at a disposable world and decided, quietly and without fanfare, to be someone who stays. The question worth sitting with is not why some people rebuild engines. The question is what we have already decided is too broken to be worth returning to, and whether we made that decision, or whether someone made it for us.